It was 2004, and the Gender Issues Center, an on-campus feminist organization at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario, was none too happy about an event occurring at a local campus bar. 10 women were being graded by 20 male judges on their skills at dancing while scantily clothed. It's not surprising a group like the GIC would be offended. It probably didn't help the event was dubbed Thunder Bay Boob Idol. You probably won't be surprised to hear it was co-sponsored by a beer company, in this case, Coors Light. But given that it was 2004, you also shouldn't be surprised by the other co-sponsor, Maxim magazine. Founded and launched in the UK in 1995, but based primarily in New York City starting in 1997, Maxim magazine was one of the most well-known publications of what came to be known as the Lad Mags, a group of magazines, also including Loaded, FHM, Complex, and Stuff, that were marketed to young heterosexual men and primarily focused on sports, technology, lifestyle, and, most importantly, sex. The Lad Mag moniker came from the magazine's noted association with the late 90s and early 2000s lad culture, a British and Irish media-driven focus on the subculture of middle-class, anti-intellectual young heterosexual men and university students, whose boorish and misogynistic behavior and celebration of drinking, partying, and casual sexism was seen as a backlash against recent cultural waves of feminism. And while not as overly explicit in its imagery as pornographic magazines like Hustler and Penthouse, or even Playboy, the Lad Mags nevertheless did largely trade on sexy, scantily clad photo shoots of female models and celebrities, and were very popular with younger men and boys who weren't old enough to buy pornographic magazines, but could easily purchase the latest issue of Maxim or FHM, or just peruse them at the local grocery checkout lane. Maxim ultimately emerged as one of the signature mags of the movement, launching numerous international editions, eventually being published in 75 different countries, and even growing large enough in stature that, for a brief moment in 2006, they came close to opening their own Vegas casino. The plan was only scrapped after local condominium owners complained the proposed building would ruin their view. Angry landowners and outraged feminists aside, though, Maxim's biggest enemy, like many magazines, would eventually prove to be the internet. The entire short-lived Lad Mag movement saw a rapid decline in sales during the early 2000s, as the rapid ascent of the internet meant much of the same kind of content could be found for free. By 2009, Maxim ceased publication of the original British edition, focusing on the American edition as its flagship. By 2013, the magazine's owners, the Alpha Media Group, decided to sell Maxim entirely, though the $20 million asking price they had to settle for was only a tenth of what they had originally hoped. Maxim was eventually sold to Iranian-American businessman Sardar Biglari, the CEO of Biglari Holdings, a holding company that also owns and controls First Guard Insurance, Southern Oil, and the Steak and Shake restaurant company. Even with the glory days of the Lad Mags a thing of the past, and overall lad culture seen more retrospectively as potentially damaging to male culture, Biglari has nonetheless kept the print edition and the digital output of Maxim afloat, albeit to greatly reduced viewership numbers compared to those enjoyed in its prime. Today, some fans of the classic Maxim era complain the modern version is a shadow of its former self, though usually those complaints regard the magazine's attempts to be slightly more upscale, and less focused on raunchy, inappropriate humor and more overt sexuality. But at least one classic key component of Maxim magazine remains, the annual publication of the controversial Maxim Hot 100. Beloved by Maxim readers, but criticized by many others, the Maxim Hot 100 was, as it sounds, a yearly ranking of the 100 hottest women in the world, consisting of celebrities and models. The idea of ranking women based almost entirely on looks alone was always going to be a debated one, and in 2016, Biglari tried to at least somewhat temper the complaints by making a significant change. Moving forward, while there would still be one overall winner, the hottest woman of the year, the other 99 women would be presented in random or alphabetical order, so as to lessen the notion of entirely ranking them all. Whether this was enough to placate the critics is debatable, as the very existence of the list still suggests a sort of valuing of physical beauty above all else. And some critics might say this was especially proven in 2001, when for the first time ever a fictional character with no real mind of her own made the Hot 100, placing at number 87, and appearing in a bikini on the magazine's cover. Though, to be fair, at least the character in question, the virtual lead of a new computer-animated film, was, as conceived by her creators, a super-intelligent scientist. The year is 2001, and Columbia Pictures and Square Pictures are ready to unleash a new, groundbreaking animated adaptation of an extremely popular video game series, and in the process hopefully launch a brand new kind of franchise character with the power to change Hollywood forever. With Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within.
4, 3,
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And the only Final Fantasy I have is Ming-Na when Aki's coming over, and how I can Alec Bald win her attention.
Oh, okay.
I warned you.
You told me before we started recording that I was going to hate your intro, and guess what? You were right.
Good. I know you very well.
Yeah. You do. Yeah. I mean, it's, not that was a hard guess, but well, but here we are, the start of another theme, somewhat kind of a continuation of our last theme. We're just shifting gears into another dimension, you might say. Mm-hmm. Another dimension. Beastie Boys fan? No.
Wow.
All right. Anyways.
I genuinely thought you were having a stroke.
Like having a moment.
That I got like a slight worry overcame me.
Hold on, Chris. I got to pause for a second. I smell toast over here. I gotta go. No, so we are kicking off the continuation of animation devastation, but this is animation 3 devastation. Devastation. We are moving from the world of 2D animated films into the much more prevalent today 3D animated films. Although we're kind of starting in an era where it wasn't necessarily the most prevalent form of animation. And that is looking back at 2001's groundbreaking at the time, and we'll talk about that, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Chris, tell us a little bit about it.
For sure. It is directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi. He's the creator of the video game franchise of the same name. It was co-directed by Motonori Sakakibara. By the way, Trev, I was in Japan this last few months ago. That was pretty good, right?
Yeah. Did you practice this with them?
I was
sort of coming up, and
I was one of the people. Believe me. Arigatou gozaimasu, you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we should just say ahead of time. Apologies for all the, probably, all the slaughtering we will do of names in this.
Yeah. But
Alec Baldwin?
Alec Bald wins a trial case for... Anyway, okay, this is stupid. Okay, Motonori is... he actually directed the CGI Pokemon movie remake, Pokemon Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, which is funny because we... started talking about that movie during the Doug episode, so that's funny. He's also the co-founder of Sprite Animation Studios, which was founded in 2002, and the only reason I bring that up is because this movie, Final Fantasy, actually bankrupted the studio Square USA. So that, what is it called? Sprite Animation was formed by members of Square after the fact, and specializing in 3D animation at the time. So,
yeah.
It is also written by Hironobu Sakaguchi and Al Reinhardt. Slight step away from the Japanese name. Who wrote Apollo 13, and Jeff Vintar, who wrote iRobot.
Yeah, basically Hironobu Sakaguchi came up with the story, and then Reinhardt and Vinter were brought on to kind of Americanize it and bring some more standard structure to it per the studio. So I'm sure we'll talk more in detail about that.
Oh, definitely. The budget of the film was originally $70 million in 2001. It ballooned up to $137 million, so doubled. The domestic take of it was $32 million, and worldwide it made $85 million. So this was like a huge bomb. Like I said, it bankrupted a studio.
It's weird because it's like forgotten about today, but it really was one of the biggest bombs of in like movie history at the time. Like this was like, and it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess we'll talk about this. I feel like even like that was like quickly swept under the rug because I feel like people didn't want to like shit talk it too much just because of the advances it made in technology.
Yeah.
I think so. It was given like a little bit more leeway than some live action bombs are, but this was a giant one.
Oh, totally. And like it was a build as the first CG animated feature film that was photorealistic. So before listeners start screaming at me, hey Chris, they made A Bug's Life and Ants and Toy Story and Shrek before this movie. Okay, there is a distinction between those films and this one. Those were truly animated cartoons in the 3D format. This was a movie designed to look as photoreal as possible, as if they hired actors live on set. So
this was trying something new.
Trying
And in
something
fact, to that same degree, before listeners also start yelling at us, matter of fact, our listeners are just pissed about this episode.
Yeah,
Our
they're
hypotheticals.
just mad at my opening. Okay.
No, but before they also start yelling at us saying, hey, they did make later Final Fantasy CGI movies, and hey, they said at the time that they weren't even planning sequels to this. Sure, but this is a rare case where we're actually talking about a different kind of franchise that fell apart, in that the character in this movie was meant to become like a franchised character.
Yes.
Like put into all kinds of different other movies and like different like media avenues, and that did not happen. And so that's another thing we'll talk about. So this is a different sort of franchise, but still one that was definitely meant to move forward and did not because of the failure of this film.
Also, listeners, hey, shut up.
Yeah, back off.
Yeah, we run the show. Trev, I know you're not a gamer. I
Right.
know I play a lot more video games than you. But especially in the modern era, let's say.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because this is like the time of this movie is still when I'm still somewhat of a gamer. Like I haven't completely fallen off yet, but as I said before, I'm definitely more of an old school gamer.
So Final Fantasy as a franchise in the video game hemisphere, what is your relation to it, if any at all?
Yeah, not much. I mean, I do remember playing one of the early ones, like in either, I can't remember if it was Nintendo or Super Nintendo, but like one of the first two Nintendo systems, I remember renting a Final Fantasy game. And quickly learning it's not my thing. I think that was actually the game that taught me, and I think I've mentioned this before, that I am not a fan of turn-based RPG games. I like side-scrollers, I like fighting games, first-person shooters, racing games. That's all fun. Turn-based like gameplay is just boring to me. And no offense to those who like, it's just not my thing. So I remember like playing that game and I just like couldn't get into it. And so I never really revisited Final Fantasy, but you couldn't like have friends who were gamers, or you couldn't be even tangentially involved in the gaming world without being aware of Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
And so it was always something I was aware of. And I knew by the time this movie came out, especially this movie's coming out on the heels of Final Fantasy VII, which I remember like the pop cultural impact of that, like how big of a deal that game was and how everyone seemed to love it. And certainly I was like, oh, that's the one with the guy with the big sword and everything, so I was aware of it. I knew enough about it to know the idea that like, oh, each game is like different. It's not like Zelda or like the Mario games where there's like the same characters running through. I knew it's a different story each time, but all have some similar fantasy elements. But yeah, it was never my franchise by any means. So I could watch this movie pretty fresh, although I know enough about the video game in general to have some thoughts on how the movie approached the subject matter.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm actually quite similar. I only have a relationship to Final Fantasy VII for the reasons you're saying. It was a cultural juggernaut at the time, and I remember watching like my cousins play it on PlayStation. And Cloud is the main character with the big sword, and I know that character especially from Super Smash Bros., which is a game I get together regularly with some of my buddies, and we have Smash Nights. So that's fun. So I know Cloud in that sense, but the subsequent sequels and mythology and everything is very alien to me. I watched the movie for the first time, actually, not to bury the lead or anything, but I watched it for the first time this weekend with my fiance, who is a gamer girl. Like she plays lots of video games, lots of turn-based, lots of she watches a lot of anime. So I wanted her, live reaction to the movie with her knowledge as well. So we'll talk about that as well.
Now, is she a fan of this franchise, like Final Fantasy, or?
She has played and dabbled within it for sure. So she was able to tell me kind of thematically what is a through line between the movies, the movie and the games, but basically the movie being very, very much its own thing.
I mean, it seems to me even like, and you can tell me if you feel like this is right or wrong, but it seems to me like even within the Final Fantasy fandom, there are kind of two separate fandoms. There is there's the people who like just love Final Fantasy as a franchise, and then it seems like even still today there are people who are just like ride or die for Final Fantasy VII. Like that's all that matters to them. And I know even like Square has like basically like continued to capitalize on Final Fantasy VII. Like I mentioned that there is a later Final Fantasy CGI movie that comes along years later, and that's like a Final Fantasy VII movie. They were like, let's play it safe this time,
Advent Children. That's what that was.
And I think they've gone back and done like other stuff in that Final Fantasy VII world. And as you said, like Cloud gets put in other games, and I just think like that's the one that they keep returning to because there's like just an intense fandom just for that game. I guess it's safe to say that's probably the peak of Final Fantasy. Like they kind of never outdid that, at least in terms of pop cultural impact. But
totally. Like even recently, PlayStation came out with the Final Fantasy VII remake.
Oh, did
So
they?
that
Okay,
that came out
yeah.
like last year.
Okay. Yeah.
So they're
Is that just like advanced, like same game but like better graphics, basically?
correct,
or-
like
Yeah.
basically from the ground up remake and
Yeah.
adding in new mechanics and this and that. And by all accounts, it is phenomenal. I played it for a good 45 minutes, but just like you, I've never been into turnstile
Yeah.
RPGs. I just never have. Like even Pokemon, like I know so much about Pokemon, the franchise. Like I watched the show, I watched a lot of the movies, a lot of my friends love Pokemon, but it was only till recently that I got into one of the oldest games that had a remake. So again, it's just something that doesn't appeal to me. I know it's very big in Japanese game culture, is turn-based RPGs. So I mean, I'm the odd man out. I know I am. I know I am.
Oh, so I had no response.
One second, I'm the odd man. So that's really why, listeners, we're not going to get into the super in-depth history of the game or games. There's just so much to go over, and they're not exactly connected, and it's different worlds and different characters and different everything. Just know that this movie is not the games, and nor did it have any intention to be a game later.
No, I mean, really, the only thing you'd really have to kind of know is that, as you said, this movie is like riding the coattails of the success of Final Fantasy VII, and like the gigantic like impact of that game was probably what spurred Square. Like Square was very cocky at this point.
Yeah.
And after coming up with, what were considered to be at the time groundbreaking cutscenes for Final Fantasy VII, which I bet look like dog shit today, but it's probably why they did that remake, obviously. But, but after doing that, they were suddenly like, maybe we could do movies too. So that's what leads to all of this, is they're riding high off the success of that. And so I guess for them, it was just easy to say, if we're going to do a movie, let's just throw the Final Fantasy name on it to like ensure we'll get those eyes on it. This is our main franchise. People already love it, so we can just use that IP and cash in on it with a movie. But that's what I think they were really just trying to create. As we'll talk about, they were trying to create their own like separate movie animation studio to kind of run concurrent with their video games.
So the movie itself, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, obviously conceptualized by the creator of the franchise. He originally wrote it in Japanese, and he's going to farm it out, and studios don't understand it, and I'd heard that not just because it's Japanese, by the way. It's just they do not understand thematically what he's going for.
Right, I think because I had heard that by this point he had kind of stepped away from the video games a little bit. He was more of just a Godfather role. He wasn't necessarily involved in like the day-to-day production of the recent Final Fantasy games, and he was kind of like coaxed back into being really heavily involved with this movie because they wanted to be able to say it's from Hironobu Sakaguchi. He's the Final Fantasy guy,
Yeah.
But I think, then they realized, what have we? I mean, it's probably not what have we done, but they're probably, but like you said, I think even in the game world, and again, this is something that I could pick up on, even with just my casual knowledge of Final Fantasy. What people love about him is his style of storytelling is very, very esoteric, very complex, very philosophical. And that's one thing to be in a video game that can take hours to play and be very elaborate. And it's another thing to translate that into a more commercial 90-minute or so movie script. And so he came up with a story that was very heavy on all the philosophical and spiritual themes he's very interested in. And that's maybe not what they thought was... Once they saw it, they're like, this is supposed to be a commercial product too,
It's what actually worries me about how Hideo Kojima is going to move into the film industry with A24, sorry. That guy's a weirdo, and he's like a weird genius, and his games are totally off the wall and strange, and I've never really dabbled in them, but I know from others, including my fiance Brittany, who played Death Stranding and loved it. And I watched her play hours of it.
I played Metal Gear Solid, and even that game was weird. And I know he's only gotten weirder since then.
Totally. Even like Metal Gear Solid, I remember watching my brother play, I think Metal Gear Solid 4 or something, and I sat with him for I think 90 minutes watching a cutscene. Yeah. So these Japanese anime video game creators are very interesting people, like even Miyazaki's the same, right? Like sometimes you don't really know exactly what he's getting at, but it's so personal. Maybe is that what I'm getting at? Like it's so interesting and weird and personal that really the only guy that knows what exactly is going on is that guy right there.
Yeah, but to be fair, because we're talking about a particular kind of movie, right? Like, so if you're making like I said, it's supposed to be 70 million, but it went to 137 million. I've even heard rumors of like higher numbers than that, but they're trying to sell this as like a commercial summer blockbuster studio IP franchise starter, right?
Totally, yeah.
So that's different for because the kind of films you're talking about that these individuals would make, there is obviously a market for them. You and I are David Lynch fans. You think of the films like Jodorowsky. You mentioned that Kojima is going to work with A24. It's not a better studio for him to probably work with, because that is a studio that makes very strange, like esoteric, pretentious, which I mean in a good way, movies.
Sure.
So like these I think they can make movies that fit their sensibilities. The problem is when you ask them to try to merge those sensibilities with a commercial product. Again, look at David Lynch and Dune. Like you can see where things start to fall apart a little bit. Well, you haven't seen that, and we'll get to it eventually on this show. But
listeners, I've been waiting. I've been waiting years now to watch Dune for the first time. I didn't want to be spoiled for part 1 and part 2 by Denis Villeneuve. So
yeah. So yeah, I think that's more the issue is like, is it really smart to ask them to try and helm a sci-fi blockbuster? That becomes more the issue. Yeah,
that's a good call. So this film in particular, after the studio, I guess they decide to go with Columbia Pictures. Again, they still don't know what the hell they bought. So this script goes through, I think, 50 incarnations with different writers. They hire Jeff Vinter. And they say, you got 2 weeks to do this. And he goes, 2 weeks? You need a full-time guy for 6 months to a year. I'll do it in 3 weeks. So that's what he does. He rewrites the entire script in 3 weeks. Then it gets translated from his script to Japanese and then retranslated back to English. Yeah. And then the film is, filmed entirely in English at that point. Not the best.
We should mention too, like we left out like an important piece of the puzzle here is that Square is the company that does the video games, but when they start making this movie, they realize that it's going to take a lot of work, right? And they can't have the same people working on it. So they actually, and when you've mentioned a company that got bankrupted, they form like a new studio, new movie studio called Square USA. And they decided to headquarter that in Honolulu in Hawaii because they're like, oh, that's perfect. It's like the middle ground between Japan and America. So all the Japanese animators can come here and the American movie makers can come here. But obviously you got to consider a big part of the budget is they built a new studio. They started a studio from scratch in Honolulu. Like I've read that was like something like 46 million or something just to make that studio.
Yep.
So yeah, like this was like, this was all from the ground up creating a whole new studio to create this movie. And then on top of that, the development mire of like the screenplay, like not being able to figure it out and 50 different drafts. So it's just like all this stuff happening. It's like this movie was like clearly like sinking in the mud even before like they animated the first frame, Yeah.
Speaking of animating the first frame, let's give a little bit of tech nerdiness to the listeners. They had to create a render farm at the studio with almost 1,000 workstations. The film has a total of 142,000 frames, which takes 90 minutes to render each one of those frames, by the way. So it took over 4 years to complete the film and a staff of 200 animators. So when Trev says $47 million to create a studio, now you got the operational cost of the fucking studio. So that's like creating the building. But to actually make this movie, well, I told you, it's $140 million to do it. So crazy.
You got to keep the mini fridges stocked,
Yeah.
You got to buy new toilet paper for the bathrooms.
Well, you know what? Because it's a Japanese studio, they got bidets, baby.
I thought you were going to say because they're animators, they just don't let them go to the bathroom.
Oh, that's an American company. That's what they would do.
Well, this was Square USA, so,
Well, okay, well, there you go.
Probably the worst of... You're getting the worst of both worlds probably here.
So let's talk a little bit about what this movie was supposed to do. So, yes, Trev said earlier on that they're on record saying, we didn't think we were ever going to make a sequel to this.
Yeah.
But what they were going to do was create the first photorealistic computer animated actress.
Yes.
In the form of Dr. Aki Ross, played by Ming-Na Wen, by the way.
voice performance.
Yeah, voice performance. But they weren't really sure if she was going to come back for more roles. But just in general, they were going to create this CG performer for the first time in history. And now, listeners, motion capture is the way of the world. I mean, we saw. Well, now we're on to the second trilogy of the Apes movies, the Planet of the Apes movies. But Andy Serkis and co at Weta really pushed this to the nth degree with Gollum, and then, like I'm saying, Caesar from Planet of the Apes, and James Cameron, the Avatar films. Motion capture is something that is very, very integral to the film industry now. But at the time, this movie really was the one to start it. Which is kind of wild.
And ultimately, for their plans, this was going beyond motion capture, right? This was going more into the realm of... This movie was done with some motion capture, but this is going even into the realm of we eventually won't even need the humans at all. We'll just have this fully created CG character, and obviously that's still a concern today that we see in, like, the recent strike and everything. It's actually more prevalent today with concerns about AI and AI-generated extras and eventually, just AI leads. And, like, this is a company that's trying to do that way back then. In fact, there's a great story, just to skip ahead a little bit, about... Matt Dillon was originally supposed to do the voice work of the lead male character in this, which ends up being Alec Baldwin. And the reason Baldwin replaced Matt Dillon is because Matt Dillon came to Honolulu, went to the Square studio, and saw some of the completed footage and started yelling at everybody, "You're trying to put actors out of business." And he stormed out of the building, and they're like, I guess we got to get a new actor, and I guess we got to get an actor with no scruples. Somebody call Alec Baldwin. So that's how that happened. Yeah. But but today, Matt Dillon's concerns back then have obviously borne out, and I'm sure he's probably patting himself on the back, saying, "See, I saw this coming."
Yeah, the real philosopher of Hollywood, Matt Dillon.
Matt Dillon, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's funny because you're just saying about CG creations taking over and this and that. The studio and the producers of this film were lambasted for what they were trying to accomplish, and I love this quote from Chris Lee, the producer. Talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs being the first full-length cell animated film ever made. He has a quote saying, "Snow White was the first all-color, full-length cartoon, and everybody thought Disney was crazy. He could have gone out and hired a real actress and got some little people to play the dwarfs, but he felt very strongly that there was a better way to tell that particular story." Mm-hmm. And it is interesting to think that, it's all cyclical, right? Back in the 30s, right? That's when Snow White was out? 30s, I think? Mm-hmm. Disney's getting shit on for pushing the medium of film, pushing different creative ways. And now here we are, 2001, and this was the same thing was going on. They had another quote saying that it was 2001, but they were living in a science fiction world creating this movie. Very cool.
I thought you were going to say that it was cyclical because here we are in 2024 and Disney is once again pushing the boundaries with a new Snow White.
Okay.
Come on, like the rest of the world, I'm sure you're very excited for the new Snow White.
Oh, I'm jazzed for it.
Remember when they were filming that back in what was it, 2002? I think they started filming that.
I think so. And then last minute they were like, "Oh no." That's gonna lose a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
okay.
Yeah.
Going back to Aki as the first CG actress. I'm sure you heard, well, you did hear in the opening, we talked about how she made it into the Maxim Hot 100, which is hilarious. Mm-hmm. I love this quote from the lead animator of the project, Roy Sato. He said he wanted to make Aki look like a supermodel, and then removed her makeup and shortened her hair because she needed to be convincing as a scientist for people.
Yeah, because attractive women can't be scientists.
No, they can't. Well, especially with long hair. I mean, what's your feeling on this, Trev? Like, I like the balls of this. Like, I like the idea of this, so to speak. But this is like putting so many carts before horses. Am I wrong? Like, creating an actress, I don't really understand. I don't really understand the conceit.
I really have a hard time wrapping my head around it, at least the way they were positioning it. I think there's something really kind of... We didn't even talk about... There's something kind of sweet about how, like, Sakaguchi named a character after his mother, who had died, a few years prior to this movie. And he says that... he even said, like, her death is, like, what led him to reflect on what happens to, like, our spirits after death. And that's how that ends up in, like, the thematics of the movie as well. And so, like, the idea of him being like, I'll create this character that can live beyond this movie. And, like, that's, like, there's a sweet idea to it. But when you start talking about it being this, like, CGI actress who can be in other kinds of movies, I'm just going to get, like, really nerdy here. And probably these aren't even the right concerns. But it's just weird that her name in the movie is Aki Ross. And then they're like, well, that's going to be the name of, like, the actress. And, like, Aki Ross as, like, a character will be in other movies. But I'm like, but aren't people going to be confused and think it's just a sequel to Spirits from, or whatever this movie's called, I already forgot. Final Fantasy, Spirits from Within. Like, because it's, if the name is always the same, you know, or is it going to be, are you going to make another movie later where it's like Aki Ross is, and then she plays someone else? Like, I don't know, it seemed really confused. And then having Ming-Na do the voice complicates it again, because as you said, she said that she was up for coming back and doing more Aki stuff, but they never made clear if that was like their plans. And so it's still, though, like, your first time out, you are attaching her to a known actress who was on ER at the time and was already, getting to be, a popular actress. So I don't know. It's like you can't really divorce her from Ming-Na either. So it's just a very, very weird idea. I don't know. Even if this movie, it would have been very interesting if this movie had been a huge hit to see what they would have tried next with that character. Because it's hard to even kind of conceptualize what they meant by that.
Well, and especially since the critics, or I guess Aki's appearance was received positively by the critics of the film. She was,
and
just
by
like
Maxim readers,
and by Maxim readers, yeah,
Kleenex boxes and lotion.
But some describe her as a mix of, Ellen Ripley from the Aliens franchise and Julia Roberts' portrayal of Erin Brockovich. I saw that was a quote,
which is weird. I get the Ripley one. Erin Brockovich, okay.
Yeah. But Entertainment Weekly named Aki an it girl, stating that calling this action heroine a cartoon would be like calling a Rembrandt a doodle. So there's that too.
And that's the question too. Like, did they plan to have Aki be in like non-action sci-fi movies? Like, was she going to be in dramas as well? And ultimately, was their thinking always like, well, she's only going to be in fully CG movies with other CG like co-stars, or is the plan that you could make like, Ocean's 12 has Sandra Bullock, Kate Blanchett, and Aki Ross, like one CGI character? Like, what is the thinking here? I don't know what they're aiming for.
That's how I take it. Yeah. Is that they were going to strive for the technology to be so photorealistic that this was the very beginnings of getting Caesar the Ape, right? Yeah. So, and don't get me wrong, I mean, Caesar the Ape is one of the greatest film creations I've ever seen. Like, I have a very, very soft spot for that trilogy of films, but and truly photoreal. But
I mean, and again, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but again, Caesar the Ape is also an ape.
Correct.
And Gollum is a creature, so it's all the best motion like the Na'vi are aliens. All the best motion capture stuff is still, there's a level of disconnect. Yeah, they're non-humans, and still there doesn't seem to be much point, in this space for someone to motion capture a human, unless you're doing the weird thing of saying like, this actor's dead, but we can have them in the movie. That's kind of how it's usually looked at. Not like this is an original, human creation by us to like have someone animate. But if you're going to do that and you're always going to need the actor for motion capture, I mean, I guess I'm, again, not to like give away my thoughts for the movie or whatever, but I would rather just watch Ming-Na, who I already like. I don't need an overlay over her. So
sure. Yeah. Do you want to just get into the movie proper now? I think we've kind of set the stage.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
The dream is always the same.
You okay?
We found it. We're closing in on the life form.
Let's move out, people. They came to unlock a mystery. I don't see how any living thing could survive out here. They came to uncover an ancient truth.
This is it. Dr. Ross has opened the door for us.
I say we go in.
What they did
What the hell is that?
was unleash a force unlike the universe has ever known.
What the hell is going on?
Something's not right! lost contact.
Oh my God.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Nothing you've seen, nothing you've experienced can prepare you.
Look out!
For where the next evolution in reality will take you.
All right, everybody, here they come.
Fire in the hole!
It is not a fairy tale. It is true.
In the year 2065, the next great assault against an invading race of phantom-like aliens is about to be launched. Dr. Aki Ross, a brilliant young scientist, races to find the invaders' secrets, not only to save the planet, but herself as well, after her body is infected by alien particles. She teams up with a military squadron, led by her old friend, Gray Edwards. But as Aki, her mentor, Dr. Sid, and Gray work towards a peaceful end, the scheming General Hein devises a plot to eradicate the aliens in one swift, destructive blow, even if it destroys the Earth right along with them.
Yeah, sure. I commend you, Chris. I didn't envy you having to watch Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within and write a plot synopsis of it. So, congrats on your hard work.
Thank you.
I'll go first. Like you, this was my first time watching this. I do remember. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. I remember when it came out for sure, because I remember the hype about it, and I remember, a lot of articles about like the groundbreaking technology, and I remember seeing the trailers and being like, well, yeah, that looks very interesting. But I also do remember being confused, even as a non-gamer, and seeing the trailers and thinking, that doesn't look like what I know of Final Fantasy, right? That just looks like a sci-fi movie. Where's the fantasy elements? So that's something we'll certainly talk about. And I know that was like a complaint of many of the fans of the video game franchise, was it just seems like it abandoned a lot of the at least the world kind of building that the games had in favor of more traditional sci-fi elements. Now, put that aside, I also just didn't see it because it came out and flopped hard. So I was like, well, I guess I don't need to bother. So this was my first time seeing it. And I will say this movie is a fascinating lesson that if you're going to get into animation, it can be like, I'm sure it can be very rewarding, but it can also be very frustrating because you can spend 4 years 1,000 workstations on 142 frames of filmmaking and be so revolutionary, and in a couple decades it looks pretty old-fashioned. That's got to be kind of frustrating. But overall, like, I'm being glib. It still, some of the animation does still hold up, and it's still an impressive looking movie. But I will say, in doing all the research for this, and I'm sure you kind of came across this too, Chris, it really sounded like one of the things that happened during the making of this movie was because they were sinking so much into the animation of it, and because there was so much pressure on it being this groundbreaking film, ultimately the style really overtook their concerns about the story. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what really... I'm just going to say it. This might be the most boring movie we've ever done on this show.
We've seen more boring, but I know what you're getting at.
I don't know, man. This was rough. This was like, I had a really hard time engaging with this on like any level beyond occasionally being like, well, that looks neat, But
sure.
The story is like to me, I thought the story is very obtuse and hard to follow, and just like, like overly like philosophical, and like when you want it to just be like a more gung-ho kind of action movie, there's really not even that much action in it. So I just found it to be very, very boring and not very fun to watch. I don't want to call it the worst movie we've ever watched because we've watched, like Maximum Ride, but as like me and my fiance talked about while we watched it, like at least Maximum Ride was like funny bad, whereas this was just like boring bad, which to me is worse. So this did not do it for me. I'm not surprised it didn't hit, because I think by being just this like sci-fi movie, I think it really let down the fans who came wanting to see like a Final Fantasy movie. But then just on a movie level, you get to a certain point where you realize style can't be enough. Like they keep making this comparison to Snow White about how like, well, Snow White was the first hand-drawn animated movie, and this is the first, photorealistic CGI movie. But the thing that Walt Disney was smart about was like, Snow White was still a good story. He was smart to say like, hey, let's take the traditional old fairy tales that have held up over, centuries and are proven stories that people like to hear and or see retold. as opposed to making this original story that just has nothing there to hook on to. And so it can be as beautiful as you want. It can be as like impressive of a time capsule piece of like, this moment in CGI animation. But when you visit it today, unfortunately, you're already kind of past that, and the story is not doing anything for you. So I was kind of bored at tears by this, to be honest.
So I'm definitely warmer than you are, but not by much. So I don't think it'll be like contentious or anything. I think it deserves a little bit more credit, but as I've said in a couple episodes, I think fairly recently too, a movie can be okay, but if your main character sort of sucks, it can really rip you out of it. And I think that applies here. And in the context of the show and the context of, their plans for Dr. Aki Ross to be a actress, not a character, but an actress, you gotta be a charm-filled, charismatic motherfucker of an actress or actor for me to just want to watch a movie star, right? Like this is what the inception of this movie was doing. They wanted to create a movie star. And I'm sorry, but Aki Ross is not a movie star. and Ming-Na Wen is really phoning it in. And the reason we know that is because she's done this expertly with Mulan. So she knows how to do animated films. She's an incredible voice actress, but in this movie in particular, you can tell that she's even confused as to what the movie is doing, or if there's obviously no clear direction or a clear script even. And
yeah, that's what I say. We might never know, but maybe that's because you say she's phoning it in, but also maybe it's on the director side, right? There's a voice director, so maybe they weren't giving her the best like guidance either.
Totally.
Yeah.
So again, she is my weak link in the film. I think everybody else around her is like a cool soldier or like,
Yeah, but they're all really one note too.
No, but whatever. Who cares? I'm talking about like a little bit. They have like archetypes at least. Like there's a little bit of an archetype to them. Like the soldiers have quips at least. The villain is mustache twirly in some way. Aki's just like, I'm the chosen one, and I'm a science nerd. And she just kind of like goes from scene to scene. At least there's slightly archetype personality to everybody around her, and I found those moments at least somewhat enjoyable. I think when me and Brittany were talking about it, we liked all of the action stuff. Was like, it held up quite well. Like I think the phantoms look really cool and spooky, and the way that they kind of glide into you and steal your soul, it's kind of fucked up, and the way that you just like lifeless body just falls. I liked all that stuff, and it was very Aliens-esque in a lot of ways, and very heavily James Cameron inspired, I felt, especially when it comes to the Marines and stuff. The difference is James Cameron is a better writer. Right? Like that's, that guy knows how to make multi-billion-dollar films. And this movie feels like it's striving for something out of its grasp. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely, it's trying, it's working. It's working.
Yeah,
and
that's
even
right.
the
Yeah,
tech.
because like Cameron also knows, people make fun of how simplistic like the thematics and the messaging is of Avatar, but Cameron knows that's what works with the mainstream audience, and like
Totally.
When you're in this, and it's like, and now let's talk about Earth's Gaia and the other planet's Gaia and how the Gaias will come together, and Aki has to find 8 spirits because she was touched by a phantom, and you're just like, what? Like I just like and you check out. I mean,
it becomes confusing because the Gaia thing is very much Awa. Like the Gaia hypothesis is very much like Awa. Like there's a living, breathing soul to the planet that we're living on, and then we become one with it when we die. That's the basis of it, right? And in this one, there is a cool concept that these phantom alien creatures are not infesting and taking over the Earth. They just accidentally got here by way of their planet exploding, and they're actually dead. Like they're dead alien ghosts, and they can't really move on. They can't really move on and be at rest. So they're kind of just floating around, stealing souls as they go. There's something interesting there. There's something cool there. But like you're saying, it gets really confusing. Like I simplified it a lot, but I'm telling you, I still don't understand what the 8 spirits are.
No, yeah, that was...
I watched this movie. I took notes during this movie. I researched the movie. I couldn't tell you what those 8 spirits are. I don't understand their significance. The visuals were cool when it all happened.
Yeah,
but
so people know what we're talking about. Like, it's revealed early in the movie that Aki was like touched by a phantom, and like that usually will kill you. But but her Dr. Sid, her like mentor, discovered that she can like keep the infection like at bay by putting 8 different spirits into her body, but they have to find the 8 spirits, and every spirit has to be a different kind of thing. Like one of them was like a turtle or something, and she finds like a plant, and then she says one is like a dying girl. Yeah, like, and it's like somehow they can like they have these like machines that tell them like where the next spirit might be on the earth, and she has to go find it. And it's just like that's the kind of thing that's obviously like a Sakaguchi idea, and that's such a video game idea, right? Like this, if this is a video game, it would be the search for the 8 spirits, and that's what you're going to look for. But because it's a an hour and 45-minute movie, the movie starts and she's already found 6 of them, and we see her find the 7th right at the start, and it's just like then you just tell us about it. It's all lip service, and you don't slow down enough to explain it to us, and that's like the death of that. Yeah.
We talked about this with Prince of Persia. We talked about this with Assassin's Creed. We've done video game movies in the past, and like I said, this is only tangentially related, but you can see the DNA of a gameplay mechanic here. And if you're making a movie at the end of your fetch quest, it's just not exciting anymore. Yeah. Like we're almost done. Right? Like the movie really should have started with her getting touched by the Phantom. Like, why didn't we see that even in a flashback? And maybe we did. There was 50 iterations of the script, so perhaps we did. And something was lost in translation as well. But I think I know you had said some of the visuals look cool every now and then, and I do agree. I think some of this really does hold up, especially in the action. But when the characters are standing around or talking or running away from things, the uncanny valley thing shows up, and it's hard not to compare to nowadays. I still will give it up for 2001 being very, very impressive, but it still just doesn't translate the way they wanted to, especially making a fucking Hollywood movie star.
That's what I was going to bring up too. Is like, I mean, you have to give it, like, you can't completely crap on this movie in terms of the technology, because obviously this was like very impressive for the time. And you said there are moments in this that if you freeze frame it, it's like, damn, that looks awesome, And like you said, like a lot of the action, it works best because it's moving so fast that some of the jerkiness and the uncanny valley elements aren't as important when you're just watching an action scene. But even to what you said about like Ming-Na phoning it in, I was going to like cut in there, and I'm glad I waited because you kind of more naturally segued into this. You can't. I'm wondering if it's like fully on her, or if in terms of this, like having a hard time connecting to Aki. And like I said, I think the other characters are one note, but like maybe you didn't care as much. But with Aki, right? Yeah. You know why it's hard to connect to her beyond like the voice performance is just this movie did butt up against the problem that all of these photorealistic CGI movies then had and still have. Her eyes are fucking dead. Yeah. Like that's the thing. It's like the eyes are the window of the soul. And like you talked about loving to watch movie stars. And that's because when you're watching a movie star, you're looking them in the eyes and you see something. You see the soul in their eyes. And these characters don't have that. And anytime they are emoting, they're cracking a joke, they're sad, they're scared, the eyes are exactly the same. And that's like one thing that they've never been able to conquer with this. And that's, and that's what makes all the characters in this come across so flat is like, there's just nothing there. They look so hollow and lifeless. And that's jarring. And you can't fall in love with Aki because as amazing as it is when they do close-ups on her face, and you're like, oh my God, I can see her pores and like her little freckles. That's so cool. But I can also see that her eyes are just dead. And it's like, it's haunting in like the wrong way. So that's a problem too, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, you can only go so far with her, 60,000 strands of hair that the tech demo came with, and everybody was like, oh my God.
Which, by the way, there's the part where she's like floating in like 0G and the hair is not floating at all. It bothered me. I don't know if you noticed that.
Splitting hairs, literally. No, but I know what you mean. It's one of these things that like you have to, as much as I was putting my brain into 2001 me watching this, it's still just something undeniable that obviously in 2001... it didn't work either. Like, I was looking at the critical reception and a lot of people are saying it's ambitious, a true East meets West movie game, a technical milestone. But then all of a sudden it slipped into cliche, uncanny valley, coldness in the eyes. It's, actually our man, Roger Ebert, fucking loved this movie.
I know.
He gave it, I know. he gave it a 3.5 out of 4. I'm going to read out his review. We haven't done this in a while. Again, that was the one who called it a technical milestone. While having some minor criticism of the plot, Come on, Roger. Okay. Come on, get it together. He concluded the reason to see the film was simply gloriously to look at it. He especially praised the realism in Aki's face. He also expressed a desire for the film to succeed in hopes of seeing others made in its image, though he was skeptical of its ability to be accepted. Well, he was right about the second part, for sure.
He was right about the second part. I mean, we certainly have had a lot of other movies that have tried this, this kind of animation. And this animation still exists, and it's still got the same problem. Chris, I'll give you a little taste of that. So you and I both recently saw Alien Romulus and quite enjoyed it. Speaking of like successful franchises, and that sent me on like this little bit of this Alien kick, because then Liz and I were like watching like the old Alien movies. And, I never played that game, Alien Isolation, which I know is like one of the things that like inspired Fede Alvarez to make Romulus. And I know it was like a huge moment in like the Alien fan base that everyone's like, oh my God, this game rules. But as you said, I was out of gaming by that point. But I've always been interested in that game because I've always been interested in the idea of like, oh, that's cool. It's about like Amanda Ripley, Ellen's daughter. So like, I was like, even though I don't play games, I want to engage with that story somehow. So I had bought like a novelization of the game and read it. And guess what? It sucked because it read like... It read like you reading a description of someone playing a video game. And then Amanda goes down this tunnel and then she sees an alien. And it's like, oh my God, I'm just reading like a beat by beat. So I was like, well, this is no fun. And then I found out that IGN made a 8-episode web series of Alien Isolation. And I was like, okay, maybe
that's your favorite website.
Well, I was just about to make a joke that it turns out that they're just as bad at animated web series as they are at everything else they do. But yeah, so I watched the web series and part of the problem is so it's like telling the whole story of the game as a web series now, but they didn't like redo the cutscenes. They take the cutscenes and then everything else they do new animation for. So it's all that like photorealistic CG, but there's like such a clear quality difference between the ones they animated for the web series and then suddenly when you're in the game cutscenes, those look so much worse because they're like doing this. They're putting more time into the web series, and that's like bad enough. So it's like you're going back and forth, and it's so herky jerky and like distracting. But also, this is just from a few years ago, and guess what? It's still the same thing. We're like, as good as they might look at any moment, the eyes are just fucking dead. I mean, it's just like it has still been the problem. This is what the Robert Zemeckis movies like Polar Express were like criticized for. Yep. There's just something there's something grosses us out when we look at these characters because we can see that that's the problem.
And even our man James Cameron can only get it done with non-human characters. So far, that's like we said before.
Well, there's the benefit there too of like we said though, like the reason it works better, not just the non-human element, but the reason it works better for the Na'vi and Caesar and everything is they're still this new motion capture. These actors have a little camera right in front of their face, and they're capturing their eyes. So we're still getting to see their eyes just with like this like CGI overlay. But here they're trying to like do it all as CGI, and something is missing clearly.
Yeah. Everything was motion captured on set except for the hand movements and their facial features, obviously. They also, by the way, every background was a matte painting. That's kind of cool. I didn't realize
and
that.
the backgrounds do look cool, and like the vehicles all look cool. Like the little car they get in for like the little car chase sequence is awesome looking. So there's like great design work in this for sure.
But like you said, it's hard to really care and emote with characters that aren't. And I'm not even saying that you need to always love the characters you're watching. Like I'm not even one of those guys. Like I still have enjoyment of films that I don't have to care about the characters, so to speak, if they're giving me at least something interesting to grasp onto. This one, though, very much, again, going back to gaming, I game a lot. Well, not a lot. Well, I game enough to say that gaming cutscenes have never really done it for me. And I've always, I get sent cinematic trailers by friends or family, or I see them in group threads, and I watch them, and I'm like, okay, like, give me the game. And in this case, it's like, give me the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or let me play the game of this movie.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and even like, beyond like the characters, not like, I think the movie definitely needed more of a sense of humor. And he said, particularly with Aki, like maybe Aki would be more likable if she wasn't so stoic and just like, and like she was allowed to have a little bit more personality. But also the structure of the plot is just, and it's it's bad. And again, 50 drafts, different writers combating different ideas. Like, I'm not surprised, but for the whole like first half of the movie, we keep cutting to like those ecky dream sequences. And didn't you get to a point where you're just like, oh my God, another one of these? Like, it's like, come on.
Because it was like the same. It was like the same exact dream constantly.
Yeah, just over and over until they had to do something different to move the plot forward, right? Until suddenly, and then they're like, oh, and by the way, Gray can like go into the dreams with her. Oh, convenient, thanks. Like that's just like suddenly thrown at you. And then even like, you were talking about how it's kind of cool, like what how the Phantoms look and how they kill people, and I agree. But it made me laugh that like maybe this is gonna be really nitpicky, but it made me laugh that in the movie's called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, and they call the characters phantoms, and they look like ghosts. They're like see-through, and whenever they kill people, you see them pull the person's spirit out of their body, and then there is like they treat it like a reveal halfway through the movie where they're like, oh my God, they're not aliens, they're ghosts, and you're like, yeah. Like, how is that not obvious from every other contextual clue you gave me from the beginning of this movie?
Well, no, I don't know if it's obvious. I think the idea of them being lost spirits on the planet, like you put that together, you're like, oh, these are definitely lost spirits on a planet, and they're dead. I don't think
it's not as like, oh my God, of a reveal as the movie treats it to be because of like, like you said, the title and like the behavior we've seen them exhibit,
Sure. I guess. I don't know. The spirits within are also those 8 spirits we don't fucking know anything about. So
yeah. I mean, maybe that's just the problem too. Is the movie just? This feels like the kind of movie that almost needs like a bunch of backstory. Like oh man, I needed to read like 2 like prequel novels or something to even understand what the hell is going on here.
Totally. I think the action was really cool. A couple of set pieces I quite
not
enjoyed.
Enough of it. I mean,
not
that's
enough of it.
Like yeah.
Well, I mean, they were already running over budget, just give them a break. But I really loved the attack on the New York or whatever, where the villain takes off the shield, so then he can prove that he can use his big weapon to destroy the Phantoms once and for all. And then they just attack the city, and I really love this one shot where there's a ship that like has a bunch of people inside, and is trying to escape. And then it gets swooped by like this dragon phantom from like super far away. And then because they've established the rules of like the spirits just being stolen, the ship just kind of like stops midair and then starts falling back. And then it's all done in one shot, one take. And then it's like falling on people and they're running away. I thought it was like just a really spooky kind of eerie action set piece, I felt. And I like that quite a bit.
This is where their ambition actually did get the better of them. Well, I mean, the whole movie is an example of that. But I mean, because like the movie's clearly at its best in its action sequences.
Yeah.
But because they wanted this to be something so much more, and because, as I said, they wanted this idea of like Aki will become an actual actress who can be in all kinds of movies and TV shows, it's almost like they were like, well, we can't just have this be an action movie. Whereas I think anyone would tell you this movie would have had a much better shot at getting a wider audience and being a bigger hit if it was like 50% more action.
Yeah.
But even when they did like when Square USA did their first test of like trying to see if they can do this kind of like a longer, animated piece, it was just 2 characters arguing. And that was like them trying to see, can we make just like human emotion come across? So I think that's like the cockiness of them being right. Like, oh, we've created like this photorealistic animation style, so let's show it off by having a lot of the movie just be characters' conversations.
Yeah.
But as I said, we've already discussed the problem with that is that because their faces can't be as animated and have the right emotion for those kind of like conversations, that's what makes the movie so boring to me. And you want it to keep getting back to the action, and there's just not enough of it. Yeah. So yeah, I think if this movie, because I'll give you an example of like 2 other movies that are animated like this that to me are like more successful, even though I don't like one of them and I like one of well okay, I'll just say it. They did two I think this. They did 2 CGI animated Starship Troopers movies. That like look like this, right?
Right.
With and the first one's not that great, and then the second one, I think it's called Traders of Mars, that actually brought back what's his
Rico?
name? Yeah, but the
Johnny
actual
Rico?
actor, Casper Van Dien, came back as Rico for that one, and that one kind of brings back like the satire of the original movie and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I quite like that one, and it still has the same issue, right? It still has the dead eye issue, but they're also like there's so much more action. And you said, like, these action sequences are kind of awesome in these CGI movies. Yeah. So, like, those movies are, like, more successful to me because they don't say, let's spend the whole middle 45 minutes of just characters talking. And that's where I was like, come on, man. This is not what I'm watching this movie for.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I get it. Like I said, most of my positives are to do with the action.
Yeah.
And like the Marines and like, again, the James Cameron influence. I like all that. But yeah, it does grind to a halt. And it is funny when you say that the test footage of two characters arguing, and obviously Square looked around at each other and gave each other high fives and was like, fuck, we're going to be billionaires. And it's such a funny example of hubris, number one, but also just context. And like remember when the first time you turned on, like Mario 64 and you were like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's like he's in my living room.
Yeah.
and it's just like, it's wild that CG technology, especially so let's talk about our theme a little bit. So 3D CGI animation ages so much worse than 2D does. And I think this is a prime example of that. Well, this was like the beginnings of it for sure. But in only 23 years since it came out, some stuff holds up, sure, but man, this is the beginning. And you can tell. You can really tell it's the beginning. But going back to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you watch that movie, yes, it's old, but it's not, you can still keep up with the big boys. You know what I mean? Like there's a certain aspect of 2D animation that has been able to create longevity across eras and different audiences. Like we even talked about that in one of the episodes recently about would kids today like a Doug movie now, or whatever we said. And I was like, they probably still want 2D animation. Like the Disney movies still survive. And I know we're talking about like the biggest movies of all time, but the medium is something that people grasp onto and they keep it. And the CG stuff seems to just age very poorly, in my opinion.
I have a couple thoughts about that. The first thing I'll mention, the first reason I think that is because the best like hand-drawn animation stuff is like where you're using animation to like visually it's gonna look like something that live action never could. You know, like I think of the genie in Aladdin, and you can only do that character as like an animated character, even to the level when you do a live action version later. You still have to have that genie be like a heavily CGI character, right? Because of the kind of things he does, or something like the Lion King, where you're like animating animals to have expressions that they could never have in real life. You know, and even Snow White, like she's a human character, but a cartoon character does not look necessarily human, right? They're animated differently. This is the trick of like what they were trying to pull off, and maybe the problem of what they're trying to pull off with The Spirits Within and other movies like this is it almost ends up feeling kind of masturbatory when you're like, we're using CG to make photorealistic stuff that looks just like what you see in real life live action. And then you're like, okay, why? Like then why not just make this live action? And that's the question I would ultimately ask is like, I think a question that's really effective to ask for any animated film is, would you like this movie, like this story, if it was the same story but in live action? And that's where I think this movie maybe falls apart, because you'd say like, well, no, because there's problems in the story level, right? Like you could have actors play these parts. You could have it be Ming-Na and Alec Baldwin and Steve Buscemi for real, and you could put them in these really elaborate sets, but you and I would still be like, well, what are the 8 spirits, and why is it so boring in the middle? So you can't just rely on the animation at a certain level. And if beyond that, then if the animation is only replicating like actual humans, it's not as interesting to me. I like the stylization of hand-drawn animation, or even more cartoony CGI animation like Shrek, where you're just like, you're creating a different looking world.
Again, like I said before, there is a distinction between a movie like Shrek, a movie like Toy Story, and all the other Pixar movies. It's like they're making a 3D cartoon.
Yeah.
And when you start to replicate live action for the sake of, I guess, hubris, really, let's be honest, they want to create a movie star, it doesn't work. And you're so right. Like, why not just film it at that point? Because, I just, right before we were recording, I was talking about the new movie Wolves on Apple TV, right? It's not a good movie. It's very, very, very average, to the point that you're like, why am I watching this? And the reason you're watching this is because Brad Pitt and George Clooney are on screen together. And that's a movie that at least can rely on something of a Hollywood charm, charisma, just fucking movie star level, where a movie like this, if it was Alec Baldwin and Ving Rhames and Steve Buscemi and Ming-Na Wen and Donald Sutherland and, well, maybe not James Woods, but and Keith David all on screen together, maybe it is just more enjoyable because you are just watching these actors.
Yeah, and maybe this is unfair because, again, I fully admit this is a trick I fall, or like a problem I fall into myself, and I've brought this up before, where I don't want to be dismissive of animation as an art form by any means, and I understand the hard work all these animators did to make this look as strong as it did at the time. But like, if it was live action and it was the same movie, I would still be bored by it. I'd still have the same problems. But if they actually built these sets, there's something in my head where I'd be more, I mean, I can just admit, I'd be way more impressed by like the production design of actually building these huge like military bases and spaceships than someone painting them or just animating them, you know? And I get that that's still an art skill, but you know, there are bad movies I enjoy watching just because the production design is so fun, you know, and that's not the same with like an animated film, because at a certain level, after the first 5 minutes where you go, wow, they did a great job with this animation, then you're kind of just like, yep, there's more of it, and there's more of it, and so it's just not the same for me. I don't know. And
No,
like I said, I said, if you were making it where you're primarily concentrating on just the groundbreaking element of it, and you mentioned how CGI ages the worst, then yeah, you're kind of only making something that is like just destined to be a time capsule piece. So you really have to think, are we making anything more than that? Like, should this be more than just a showcase piece for the technology? And I think, unfortunately, this movie is just mostly that.
You sound like all of our enemies talking about Avatar right now.
Well, guess what? There's a reason Avatar, both of them, made $1 billion, and this
billions of
billions, yes, and got a theme park, and you know, like, and this is just like, you know, this is legacy. Is there's a couple like video essays on YouTube about what went wrong with the Spirits Within.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
that's its legacy. So.
That's a good segue, though, because I want to talk a little bit about legacy in the form of physical media. So I think, you know, this movie, first of all, let's get out of the way. Did this deserve sequels? Did Aki deserve to be a movie star? Trev, go.
It definitely didn't deserve sequels, so no loss there. The Aki thing is interesting to me because, like I said, my gut reaction is to say no, but there's like the sick part of me that just wants to know what they were planning. Like,
Yeah.
If it was like the next time where they're like, and now Aki's going to be in like a romantic comedy with like Matthew McConaughey, like there is a part of it that's like, I kind of want to see that, you know? But so I'm like interested in whatever they were thinking. But ultimately, when you watch this movie, as you said, the problem is I did not fall in love with Aki. I don't care how many bikini photo shoots you have her do for Maxim. I like my girls to look like they're living. I know. So
Controversial.
I know, yeah. So just she didn't do much for me. So no, I'll answer no to both questions. How about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I know I like this movie a touch more than you. Not anywhere near to move the needle at all the other way, but yeah, no, I think this movie is a nice time capsule for technology, and it did push the medium. So in there, I still respect it, and I think it's important. Is it important to watch? Probably not. No. But
just go watch Final Flight of the Osiris, which is the only other thing that this studio ended up making.
Yeah, part of the Animatrix. An awesome collection of anime. But yes, DVD home releases. Trev, you know that I am still an avid collector. I still like buying movies every year. I buy, 15 to 20 of them, of either my favorite big action movies or boutique releases. But when this came out in 2001, this is a couple years into the DVD market, and there's something really lost today in the physical media industry. Not just that it's going away, but your $40 friggin' 4K Blu-rays have nothing on them. And back in the day, some of the greatest things you can do was get these DVDs that had special features and commentaries and all this other stuff. And this DVD was so packed with extras that it was nominated for Best DVD Special Edition at the Saturn Awards. It had 15 featurettes. It contained 2 versions of the film, one including the basic CGI in sketch form, and then obviously the theatrical cut. It had 2 full-length commentary tracks. with the creator and the artists and the producers, and then also one with an isolated score, which is kind of cool. But the DVD made, almost $30 million from rentals alone. So this is back in the day when a DVD release could sometimes save you from financial destitution.
Didn't save this one.
It didn't. But 30 million is a lot, like in rentals alone. So, and only in the US, by the way. But
yeah, and is it weird? Like, and I don't know if you felt this way too. Like, well, you were like a little higher in the movie than me, but still not much. But like, I did not like the movie, like basically at all. Like, this is really like one of my least favorite things we watched, just because I was so bored. But then I read about the DVD, and it said like 2 full-length commentary tracks with the sequence supervisor and the lead artist and the creature supervisor and the animation director. And there was a part of me that was like, kind of want to listen to both those commentaries.
Yeah,
like,
no, totally.
Yeah. I want to hear what these I want to hear what these guys have to say about the making of this. Like, I bet that's more interesting than the movie for sure.
I thought you just wanted to watch the Easter egg where it has the whole cast of the CGI characters reenacting the Thriller dance.
We really lost something with this. Like, I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to go watch the clip. I believe it's from Hot Ones with Matt Damon talking about what the death of the DVD market has done to filmmaking in general.
So what happened was, the DVD was a huge part of our business, of our revenue stream, and technology has just made that obsolete. And so the movies that we used to make, you could afford to not make all of your money when it played in the theater, because you knew you had the DVD coming behind the release, and 6 months later you'd get a whole nother chunk. It would be like reopening the movie almost. And when that went away, that changed the type of movies that we could make. I did this movie Behind the Candelabra, and I talked to a studio executive who explained it was a $25 million movie. I would have to put that much into print and advertising, right, to market it, what we call P&A. So I'd have to put that in P&A. So now I'm in $50 million. I have to split everything I get with the exhibitor, right, the people who own the movie theaters. So I would have to make $100 million before I got into profit. And the idea of making $100 million on a story about like this love affair between these two people, yeah, I love everyone in the movie, but that's suddenly a massive gamble in a way that it wasn't in the 1990s when they were making all those kind of movies, the kind of movies that I loved and the kind of movies that were my bread and butter.
Great discussion about that, about like that idea of like how you used to be able to make these like smaller budget movies and not worry as much about the theatrical because you knew you could make your money back on DVD later. And with that gone, that's why Hollywood is more risk averse and does not want to make mid-budget movies anymore. But beyond that, how many filmmakers that you love today have you heard say that like these DVD making ofs were like their film school? Yeah. And I always think about how the fact that we're not doing that anymore. You know, when I was growing up, there was first before the DVD market, I don't know if you have any memory of this, but HBO for like the big blockbusters used to always have these like half-hour making ofs before the movie came out. So there's like the making of Twister or the making of Independence Day, and you'd watch that for like a couple weeks before the movie came out. And then sometimes there was TV specials about the making of a movie, and then we got into the Laserdisc, and then obviously even bigger the DVD boom market, where suddenly all these movies had these making ofs, and it's just like that's film school, and like you were learning about like the ins and outs of like movie making. And I think, you know, I know it's a heavy topic of conversation about why do younger generations not value movies as much anymore. And obviously part of that is just because of, you know, things like YouTube and stuff. They have more things vying for their attention. But I also think it's because they're not incentivized to care about movies as an art form as much anymore, because the movies are thrown out there, but nothing about the making of the movie is made available to them. And so it's just not the same. And I think that's a real shame.
That's funny you say that, because I have a quick anecdote that is related to this. Firstly, I do remember those making up featurettes. There was, I think I mentioned on this podcast many times about certain movies, but I used to watch this show called Movie Magic. Yeah. And it was like a 30-minute show that would highlight like 2 different blockbusters, and it would show CGI and how they built the sets and blah, blah, blah. Like it would give you the BTS stuff that we discuss on this podcast. And then commentary tracks were the original podcasts for me. You know, like throwing on the commentaries of the Lord of the Rings extended editions, right? And you hear the
Dude,
cast
man.
commentary and like then the filmmaker commentary. It's just incredible stuff, right?
Not to throw off your anecdote, I'll let you get back to it. But I remember when I first got my first Laserdisc player, and because I had Laserdiscs before DVDs, and I remember explaining to other people like what an audio commentary is because it was so mind blowing to me. And I was like, no, you get to like listen to the director talk for the whole movie. And I was just like, the first of those I ever listened to, I was just like, oh my god, this is the coolest thing ever. And like nobody understood what I was talking about. But yeah, that's probably honestly like commentaries and like feature length making ofs that's my favorite thing. And those are what I miss the most. Yeah.
I can totally relate to explaining to my friends and family that I watched the movie without the actors talking.
Yeah.
And them looking at me like I'm a total moron. I remember this one time when I got the Blade 2 DVD. I watched the full movie and then I immediately restarted it because Del Toro did a commentary track and I watched it twice, just back to back.
Isn't it Del Toro and Wesley Snipes, I think?
I can't remember that.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
I thought it was, but my craziest one is getting the extended Lord of the Rings set and watching the whole extended movies and then being like, well, now for each one, I also have to watch the 3 commentaries. And that's
my God.
You know, I did it. That was like,
Wow,
you
that's
know,
crazy.
like a month's work, you know, so.
Yeah. Okay, so my anecdote was was that, so my sister is also getting married and I really love her fiance. He's a great guy and he's just a good dude. And we were out at a house party recently and, you know, I'm always talking about movies in some way, shape or form, right? And I'm telling some people, you know, about hobbies and stuff. I was like, oh, yeah, I do this podcast with me and my buddy. And then he actually just kind of stopped me and he says, because he's very different than me or you. He doesn't really value, as you're saying, film in any meaningful way. And he's, you know, marrying my sister, and my sister is a product of me because she's younger than me. So she does. So he said to me, he goes, what is it about movies? Like, why do you like movies so much? That's not all you talk about, but it's obviously a big part of your life. And I said to him, I go, you know, I'm going to butcher this obviously because I'm going off of memory what I said, and we were drinking. But I think I said something like, in all the mediums of art forms, it's very rare to have thousands of people working to this one goal to get out this 90-minute thing. And because I know how much work goes into the pre-production, the during, and the post-production, every movie is kind of remarkable in a lot of ways. Like, we live in a day and age where anybody can make a movie, fine. But we definitely live in a day and age where anybody can make a song. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's so many things. Like, I'm not trying to denigrate music or anything like that either, but to make a movie, you need so many moving parts. There's a reason why credits are that long to a movie. And then also there's a reason why that most people don't fucking wait. You know, like they go on forever. There's so many moving parts. And I think when it goes to to just film production in general, all those little BTS things, those special features, those commentary tracks really ingrained in me just how fucking hard it is to make a movie. Yeah. And that's why something like, to bring it back to Final Fantasy, you know, it's very mid to not great. Some would say bad. But there's still something that you respect, that like, wow, they still came together to do this. You know?
Yeah.
200 animators, 4 years of their lives, fucking 142,000 frames, rendering at 90 minutes a frame. There's something crazy that this even got made. And I think that's why, like, you know, to end my diatribe here, that's kind of why I like movies. It's just fucking, every movie's kind of a mini miracle.
And it was all worth it for them to years later hear me on a podcast just go, it's boring. No, but I agree, though. Like my go-to answer to that question, it's kind of similar to yours, tying into the same idea about how it's the ultimate like collaborative art form. Same idea to that is I always say like people are like, what's so special about movies as opposed to other art? Because obviously I'm a huge avid reader as well, and I quite like music, and there's other art forms I'm interested in, but movies are the one that I always say combines them all. Like you can watch a great movie and then have a discussion about the screenplay. So you're talking about the writing, and then you can talk about the if you want to go into the auteur theory, you can talk about like what was the director trying to accomplish, but then you can also talk about like what was the director trying to accomplish in regards to his collaborators, because there's also the cinematographer who's got to lend the visual eye to it, and the editor. You and I love editing, and then the music, and this is why you and I had discussions about I'm more of a musical guy than you, but like then you say like, well, with musicals, then you even get into like singing. Like every art form is like apparent in movies, and so like that's what I think is like the best thing about it is it's like you're not just talking about one singular thing after you watch it. You're talking about this merger of all the different art forms, and it just transports you to another world. And like the making of it, I would so much rather watch like a 3-hour documentary about the making of this movie because it sounds fascinating than I would the movie again. And so I get that like why the DVD would be interesting, and I'm a huge, as you were talking, I looked it up. I keep track of my collection on a website, and I currently have, let's see, I only have 7 4K Blu-rays. Don't hate me. I still don't have a 4K player, but I have 788 Blu-rays and 1,180 DVDs. So yeah, I'm still a collector. But as you just said, I also like more recent movies. I don't buy as many of them, and it's not even because I don't want the physical media, because I still always prefer physical media streaming. But there's a big part of me now, if there's like a movie I love and I'm like, I'll go buy the Blu-ray, I turn it over and I go, what are the special features? Oh, none. And suddenly I'm like, I guess I don't need to own it if I can't watch like a documentary or listen to a commentary about it. So that's what holds me back. And that's why nowadays I'm mostly only buying like the boutique label releases where they're finally, they're actually doing special features still. Yeah. So we need studios, get your shit together and start putting, a little bit of work into these releases again.
Yeah, and I buy primarily buy a lot of like action stuff as well because of the sound. Me, I'm a big sound guy. And people, you love watching your quote unquote 4K streaming on your Netflix. Well, let me tell you, you're still getting digital artifacts. You're still getting ghosting. It's not true 4K. But I digress. Fine, you have a great TV and it looks good. But guess what you're not getting? You're not getting 5.1. You're not getting 7.1. You're not getting Atmos sound. It says you are, but you're not. Because think of it this way. How in the world... we just told you how many frames this movie was. 142,000 frames. 90 minutes to render. They had something like 15 terabytes of artwork. Okay? How do you think they upload 100,000 hours... hundreds of thousands of hours of content onto streaming services? It's by compressing the sound. And the sound sucks. And you can have the best stereo system in the world. You can have the best TV in the world. But Netflix, Disney Plus especially, by the way, the sound quality is really, really bad. And I'm sure most people
guess
listening...
what? The Disney sound quality on their home releases sucks too.
That too. No, for sure. They cheaped out there too. Yeah. But I guess, I'm sure listeners are thinking right now, yeah, but mine's good enough. And I guess... I would say dream a little bigger, and there all these thousands of people putting the effort into something. You know what I like, Trev? It's taken 100 and something episodes for us to lament filmmaking and and the art form in general on our Final Fantasy episode.
Look, the Earth Gaia didn't give birth to all of us for you to watch a shitty, streamed, bad sounding version of like Beethoven's Second. Go buy the Blu-ray for Christ's sake.
Yeah. All right. I'm good.
So that said, are you going to start like scouring your local Goodwills and thrift shops for the Final Fantasy DVD? Because I bet it's probably pretty easy to find.
Isn't it funny too? Like you say that, but it had this incredible DVD release and it made a ton of money and it was all over the place. Well, it took forever for them to come out with a Blu-ray version. It took them even longer to come out with a 4K version in 2021. But now everybody, after everything we just said, Sony's made this available on their YouTube channel for free. Throwback Tunes. So if you want to go see one of the biggest technological advancements in animation, go to the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So that's where we are,
That's what Eki should just be like. They should bring Eki back now as like a YouTuber. She should do like YouTube video essays. Mm-hmm. Just those dead eyes staring at you for 45 minutes.
Just her at the other side of Sean Evans at Hot Ones, just like
talking about like the history of like the Drew Carey show or something.
Wow. Okay. Next episode, Trev, will be our flash forward in time, a decade from the beginnings of motion capture to another technological advancement. We're looking at The Adventures of Tintin from 2011. So 10 years later, we're going to see where the tech is at, see if it has the same problems or not.
From two filmmakers, I would say, are very, very important to both of us. So,
yeah, definitely. Follow along at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2 FPod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be great. And join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And you can join along the ride that is animation 3D Evastation.
That's right. Now go look up all the Aki Rule 34 stuff, you pervs.
We didn't talk about, I mentioned his name once, James Woods, but we didn't talk about how, man, that's a good villain voice.
Oh yeah, James Woods is like one of the ultimate, like, man, it sucks he's a piece of shit, because I love James Woods on screen. He's so good. Like,
I know.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Hercules?
Not as much as everyone else, but I obviously he was great as Hades. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that last gasp of Disney 2D animation was like the perfect timing of my life.
Yeah. See, I was kind of out by that point, so that's why like Emperor's New Groove and like Hercules and all those like don't mean as much to me. Like, okay. I kind of like Lion King and Aladdin were awesome, and then I was kind of like done after that to a certain degree. Although I do have and this probably falls in that realm I just said I don't care about, but I do have like a little bit of a soft spot for Treasure Planet.
Treasure Planet's great. That's a very underrated one. Mm-hmm. That might be on our list.
Is it? Well, maybe it should be.
It might be. It might be. Yeah. That was one of my brother's favorites. He loves Treasure Planet. And I think, is that Michael J. Fox? Or no, that's Atlantis.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever saw Atlantis.
Those two movies like look the exact same, and I always mix them up. Like the animation style is almost
bad things about Atlantis, so I just didn't bother with it.
Yeah. But Treasure Planet, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Do you like Titan AE?
Never saw it.
Titan AE is good.
Yeah,
that's like your mix. The mix.
That was
of
Matt
2D
Damon,
and 3D.
right?
It was. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That was a fucking banger. I loved that movie. It was like more. It was like, well, from my memory, it might be one I don't want to revisit. Might be a Road to El Dorado all over again.